Ever since I was a little girl, I've always loved food, not just eating it, but making it. There's something special about preparing a meal and watching people enjoy it. It felt like I was giving them a little piece of myself every time they took a bite. I grew up in a small, peaceful town called Cedarbrook, where everyone knew each other. Our house was on the outskirts, surrounded by a garden full of flowers and vegetables. The kitchen was the heart of our home. My mum was an incredible cook, and she ruled that kitchen like a queen. I remember standing by her side, watching her chop vegetables, stir pots, and create the most delicious meals. I would always ask, "Can I help?" And she'd let me. She'd guide me, teaching me the little tricks that turned ordinary dishes into something special. Mum's potato soup was my favourite thing she made. It was creamy and comforting, and the smell of it simmering on the stove made the whole house feel warm. Watching her work, I learned how food could bring people together. My family would always tell me, "Emma, you're such a good cook. You should be a chef someday." But there was one problem. In Cedarbrook, people thought cooking in a restaurant was a man's job, not a woman's. Women were expected to stay at home, cook for their families, and keep the house in order. It made me sad, but deep down I knew that I couldn't let that stop me. I loved cooking, and I wanted to prove that women could be chefs too. Every day after school I would practice cooking. I made soup, bread, pies, and anything I could think of. My family loved everything I made, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to do more. I wanted to cook in a real restaurant. So when I heard about a job at a famous restaurant in the city, La Belle Époque, I knew I had to try. The city was nothing like Cedarbrook. It was full of tall buildings, crowded streets, and people rushing everywhere. I had never seen anything like it. The streets were lined with cafes and restaurants, and the smell of fresh bread and roasting meat filled the air. But it wasn't just the size of the city that excited me. It was the chance to follow my dream. I had heard of La Belle Époque, the most famous restaurant in the city. It was known for having the best food around, and the head chef, Michel Fournier, was a legend. People from all over came just to eat there. When I heard they were hiring, I knew I couldn't miss this opportunity. I packed my things, grabbed my mum's old recipe book, and set off for the city. It was a long journey, and when I finally arrived, I could feel my heart racing. The restaurant was even grander than I imagined, with large glass windows that let the light pour in, and the smell of delicious food wafting out onto the street. As I walked inside, I noticed a line of chefs standing outside the kitchen. They all wore tall white hats and fancy jackets. I felt out of place, but I didn't let that stop me. I was here for a reason. When it was my turn, I nervously walked up to the door where Chef Fournier stood. He was tall and serious-looking, with a stern expression on his face. "Are you here for the job?" he asked. "Yes, I am," I said, trying to sound confident. He raised an eyebrow. "But you're a woman." I felt my face flush, but I didn't back down. "Yes, I'm a woman, but I can cook. I can prove it." Chef Fournier stared at me for a moment, then sighed. "All right, I'll give you a chance. You can cook for me. If I like it, maybe we'll talk about the job." I couldn't believe it. This was my chance. I followed him into the kitchen, and the moment I stepped inside, I knew this was where I belonged. The kitchen at La Belle Époque was nothing like the one back home in Cedarbrook. It was enormous, with stainless steel countertops that gleamed under the bright lights. Every surface was covered with ingredients, herbs, spices, fresh vegetables, meats, and more. The air buzzed with energy as chefs hurried back and forth, shouting orders to one another, chopping, stirring, and plating dishes with precision. The noise of clattering pans, the hiss of food on the stove, and the constant motion of the kitchen was overwhelming. But in that moment, all I could think about was proving myself. Chef Fournier led me to an empty station, giving me a sharp look as he handed me a large, heavy knife. "Get to work," he said curtly, pointing to a stack of potatoes on the counter. "Show me what you've got." I took a deep breath and tried to steady my nerves. The sound of knives chopping, the sizzling of food in pans, it was like music to my ears, but I had to stay focused. I had only one chance to prove I belonged here, and I wasn't about to waste it. I picked up a potato and started to peel it, moving quickly but carefully. The potatoes I'd grown up with weren't quite like these, but they were close enough. I thought about the way my mum used to make her potato soup. Simple, warm, comforting. I remembered the little tricks she used to make it taste just right. Slowly I chopped the potatoes into even chunks, letting the knife glide through them with ease. There was something soothing about the rhythm of the chopping, something familiar that made me feel a little more at home in this strange, high-pressure kitchen. As I worked, I tried to block out everything else. I wasn't there to impress anyone with flashy techniques or complicated flavours. I was there to cook from the heart, just like I had done with my family in Cedarbrook. I set the potatoes into a pot, added some water, and set it on the stove. Then I grabbed the cream. It wasn't the same as the thick cream I used back home, but it would do. I poured it in slowly, watching the liquid swirl with the potatoes, and then I added a pinch of salt, a dash of pepper, and a dash of garlic powder, just like my mum always did. As the soup simmered, I felt the warmth of it filling the air, and a tiny smile crept onto my face. It was starting to smell just like it did at home. The other chefs didn't seem to notice, their attention focused on their own stations, but I felt a spark of confidence. This was my moment. I could do this. After a few minutes, the soup was done. I ladled it into a bowl carefully, making sure the consistency was just right. It was creamy, with a slight sheen of richness on the surface. It looked perfect. I took a deep breath and carried the bowl over to Chef Fournier, who was standing by a table, talking to one of the other chefs. "Here," I said, setting the bowl down in front of him. Chef Fournier looked at me, then at the bowl, before picking up a spoon. He tasted it slowly, carefully. I stood there, waiting, my heart thumping in my chest. Was it good enough? Would he like it? For a moment there was silence. I could feel the tension in the air. I had poured my heart into this dish, but would he see that? Would he see me? Finally, Chef Fournier looked up, his eyebrows raised in surprise. This is incredible," he said, his voice softer than I had expected. "I've never tasted potato soup quite like this before. It's rich, but still light. Creamy, yet not too heavy. You've got something here." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He liked it, but then he set the spoon down and sighed deeply, his expression turning serious. "I'm impressed, Emma, but I don't know, can we really have a woman as a chef in this kitchen? You've seen how the customers are. Most of them expect to see men in the kitchen. It's not easy being a woman in this business. It's risky." His words stung, but I didn't let them show. I knew this would be hard. But I was determined. "If you give me the chance, I promise I will work harder than anyone else here," I said, my voice steady. "I'll prove that a woman can do this job just as well, if not better, than any man. I won't let you down." For a long moment, Chef Fournier just stared at me, his lips pressed into a tight line. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Finally, he sighed again. "All right," he said, his tone softening a little. "I'll give you a chance. 1 month. If the customers like your cooking, you can stay. But if not, well, you'll have to go." It wasn't much, but it was enough. I felt my chest fill with hope. I wasn't going to waste this chance. I would work harder than I ever had before. I wasn't just cooking for myself anymore. I was cooking for every woman who had ever been told she couldn't do something because of her gender. I nodded, a determined smile crossing my face. "Thank you, Chef. I won't let you down." And with that, I knew that no matter how hard the road ahead might be, I was ready. I woke up early every day and worked late into the night. I spent hours in the kitchen, cooking with everything I had. The other chefs weren't exactly friendly, and some of them whispered behind my back. But I didn't care. I was determined to prove that I belonged. At first, some customers were hesitant to try my food because I was a woman, but slowly word started to spread. One day, a woman came in and tried my potato soup. She loved it. She told all her friends, and soon more and more people came to La Belle Époque just to try my cooking. My soups, pies, and roasted chicken became popular, and people started asking for me by name. One day, Chef Fournier called me into his office. "You've done it," he said with a smile. "Your food has brought in more customers than I could have imagined. You've earned your place here." I felt a wave of pride wash over me. I had worked so hard, and now I was finally where I wanted to be. From that day on, I continued to create new dishes and make the customers happy. I helped other women who wanted to become chefs, just like I had once dreamed. Years later, I became known as one of the best chefs in the city. People came from all over just to taste my food. And every time someone smiled after a bite, I remembered that first moment when Chef Fournier tasted my soup. It reminded me that with hard work and courage, any dream can come true.